letter Y, I'm going to look at youth, or you could just say young if you like that word better. It, for my purposes, they mean the same thing. That God really has a habit of, he works with young people. And when, I mean, he uses old people too, but when he's doing something special, it almost entirely, he does it through young people. And I'm not sure if just maybe they're better at listening. They don't have, so many excuses and arguments against God, so they just do what he said and believe him, take him at his word. But like some of the most famous examples are like the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament, that God has kind of a counseling session with him and says, don't say, oh, I'm just a youth, I can't do this kind of thing. It's like, I've called you for this. Um, in the New Testament, Paul and Timothy have almost the same kind of a conversation, with Paul telling him, don't let anybody look down on you because of your youth. Like, God has called you to this, do the job that he's given you. But some of the less obvious examples are things like, when Joseph is pulled out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream. I mean, not only is he, a foreign slave prisoner who's standing in front of the most powerful man on the planet, who is literally worshipped as a god, and he doesn't just interpret the dream, but then moves on to giving him advice and saying, well, this is what Pharaoh should do. Like, he's a 20-something kid. And, the people who advise Pharaoh are the wise old men. They're probably in their 80s or more. That this, slave kid to show up and have the audacity to tell Pharaoh, to give him advice is mind-blowing. And we read right past that. There's also, like, of course, David, when he showed up and ends up facing Goliath, the only reason he was there making that trip is he was too young to be part of the army. And that means he was less than 20. Another one that's kind of similar to that, that's less obvious, and I'm not sure about this one, but it's my own theory. I believe that most of Jesus' disciples were teenagers. They were under 20. And I think that only Peter was actually the, adult of the group who was older. Jesus, of course, was, somewhere between 30 and 33. But there's this moment when some of the critics come up and they question Peter. And it's funny to me that they don't go to Jesus directly, but they come to Peter and say, oh, does your master pay the temple tax? Which, that's back in the law. There's a thing that says that every man over 20 owes half a shekel per year of the tax. That's just how it works. It's a very simple, flat thing, half a shekel per person. But it's for men over 20. And when Jesus circles back to Peter about that, and that's kind of a funny conversation, but he sends him out fishing and says, you're going to catch a fish and find a coin in its mouth. That's a shekel, and you give that to them to pay for you and me. And that's kind of an implication, at least in my mind, that the other guys don't need to pay. That, because he didn't send them to find 6 shekels to pay for 12 disciples, he found 1 shekel to pay for Peter and Jesus. And it seems to me that they're the only ones that needed to pay. The rest of them would have been underage. It might be that way, it might not. It doesn't really make a difference, but that's the way I see it. God is always working with, the youth. And sometimes we view them as like, oh, they're the church of tomorrow, they're the next generation. But honestly, they're the most likely place for God to do something in the church today. Like, you can read church history, and the biggest revivals, the great moves of God, the Great Awakening, these kind of things, they started in youth. Sometimes in actual youth ministry, it's like teenagers, high schoolers kind of a deal. But often it's like the 20-somethings. It's the people who are just starting out on their own, just kind of establishing their own identity and not just being with mom and dad. Those are the people where God does something, massive. And I don't know any examples of something like that that started in the seniors ministry. And that doesn't mean that, when you're over 40 like I am, well, it's too late for you, God's done with you. Because the Bible is filled with the idea of, like, the wisdom of the elders to help guide the next generation. That, that's how so many of the youths that I listed out, they were able to do things because they had learned from their elders. And that this is the body of Christ, that we're all different parts of the same body and we need each other, that the it's the wisdom of the elders and the not just energy but like this kind of a vitality and eagerness of the youth, that their willingness to just take God at his word and go with it. And like we need both of those things, but the youth is really where where a spark turns into a flame. And that's why it's so frustrating to me. So many churches in America have a bigger budget for the cemetery out back than they do for their youth programs, while Disney and Netflix and whoever else are more than happy to spend billions of dollars to try to get the kids' attention. That we act like it's a secondary thing, that once real church is taken care of, then we'll throw them a bone. If they really need something, they can do a fundraiser. Like, that is not God's mentality towards youth, and it shouldn't be our mentality either.